Well, welcome back. Bible Stories for Grown-Ups, Genesis, Part 2. I want to thank everyone for their attention. We're talking about the Bible, and we'll just review a couple of things that I think should be said like every time we do this, and that is that the Bible is not history. It is not a history book. It was not written to be a history book. It was written to tell us some stories about ourselves that would be helpful to us in our growth. And then if we pay attention to them, and if we understand what they mean, they'll be a lot more helpful. So to take the Bible literally is to miss the point. Although, on one level, on the literal level, the stories are, I mean, it's something. Yeah, there's some enjoyment there. There may be a number of things that we can take from it. But more importantly is the mental aspect, which is how we interpret the story. What it means to us today. What individually, what we're getting out of it. And then, of course, the most important thing is the spiritual aspect of the story, or how it inspires us, how it inspires our hearts. And so this is what we're going to focus on as this thing unfolds. And last week we talked about Genesis, and anybody who's interested in knowing about that can the first part can go back on YouTube here and get that video and take a look at that. But today we're going to start with the temptation of Eve, which is Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. Now here, what we have, just to set up the story, what we have is that in the story, God has created a man, called him Adam, set him down in a garden, saw that he was lonely, gave him some animals to play with, saw that that didn't help, so gave him a woman taken directly from his own body, from his rib. Now, by the way, this is not scientifically sound. This is not genetically sound. This idea, if this is a literal story, this was not a good beginning. Because this would be like what and I don't really want to offend anybody, but really what we're talking about here is the ultimate inbreeding. It's really not optimal for the species, okay? Now, but we also remember that the first story about the creation of men was that men were created in the image of God, male and female, they were created. And then we get this second story about a man being created out of the dust of the earth and God breathing the life into his nostrils and then creating this woman out of him. Well, if we think about it as just being a symbol, if we think about it, and it seems to me an appropriate symbol, we think about Adam as being symbolic of all men and Eve as being symbolic of all women, that maybe the story will be a little bit more helpful to us. In any event, there they are. They're in the garden. They're in the garden. They're happy. They are in harmony with the garden. We can think of the garden as actually, if we stretch our imaginations, we can think about the garden as being symbolic of the world. So in the garden, they are in harmony with all the animals, with everything. They have no wants, no needs, no sense of lack whatsoever. And when I am saying that they're in harmony, what I'm trying to get across here is they are of one mind. There is no conflict. There are no problems. This is like this mythical. So the Garden of Eden becomes this mythical place where, if we can only return to the Garden of Eden, then there wouldn't be any suffering. We'd all be in harmony, and wouldn't that be nice? Well, so what happens? The serpent comes into the picture. And here's what it says about it in chapter 3, verse 1. It says, "Now the serpent was more impudent than any of the wild animals of the field which the ever-living God had made. So he asked the woman, "Is it true that God has said, 'You may not eat of every tree of the garden'?" And the woman replies, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, 'Do not eat of it, and do not even touch it, lest you die.' But the serpent answered the woman, 'You will not die. But God knows that at the time you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, acquainted with both good and evil.' So the woman, perceiving that the tree was good for food, and beautiful to the eyes, and a tree stimulating to the intellect, she took some of its fruit and ate it, and gave some to her husband with her, and he also ate it. And then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they became aware that they were naked. They accordingly joined fig leaves together and made aprons for themselves. Then they heard the sound of the ever-living God moving in the garden, in the breeze of the day. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the ever-living God called to the man, saying, 'Where are you?' And he replied, 'I heard your sound in the garden, and perceiving that I was naked, I hid myself.' And then God asked, 'Who told you you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree which I commanded that you not eat?' And the man replied, 'The woman.'" It was the woman. "The woman who you gave to me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate it." "Why did you do that?" the Lord God asked. And the woman answered, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate it." Now here's what we've got going on here is everybody's blaming everybody else. It's everybody else's fault. But it's very interesting, this whole thing, this whole scenario of the man blaming the woman, this started a long tradition which continues to this day. It's the woman's fault. And in the patriarchal society, the Hebrew society that grows out of this, and in ours, especially in traditional mainstream churches, the women have continued to be denigrated ever since this story was first put out there. It's the woman's fault that we fell from grace because she tempted the man. And so this temptation has been translated into all kinds of sexual innuendo, but essentially it's the idea that the woman presented this to the man, he was fooled and ate it. So, and of course the woman blames the serpent, but God speaks first to the serpent, and he says, "Because you have done this, you will be accursed more than all other living things." He says a bunch of other stuff, but he says, "Now you're going to crawl upon your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. And I will cause an antagonism between you and the woman, and between your progeny and her progeny. He shall wound your head, and you shall wound his heel." So I guess you're going to stomp on snakes when you see them, and they're going to bite you if they see you first. That's why. This is why, because God punished them, right? But he said to the woman, "Your sorrows and your joys will increase." Your sorrows and your joys will increase. "You shall give birth to children with pain, but your love shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." So now here is this idea that both your sorrow and your joy will increase. So now there's no more balance anymore. You're going to have this roller coaster ride of emotion. and suffering and pain as a result of this thing that you did. Then he says to the man, he says, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, saying, eat not of it, I will set the ground apart for your cultivation, and in sorrow you shall eat from it every day of your life, and it shall grow thorns and briars for you. But you shall have the plants of the field for your food. In the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread, until you return to the ground from which you were taken. For dust you are, and to the dust you shall return. And then he gave his wife the name of Eve. Actually, Eve means life container. Because she was the mother of all life. And for Adam also and his wife, the ever-living God made clothing of skins and dressed them. So he was kind of mad, not that mad, made little outfits for them so that they go out into the world and be dressed. It's very interesting, made these outfits. So here's the story. The tree represents duality. The tree of knowledge, actually, the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So the tree and its fruit represents us coming into an awareness of good and bad, dark and light. And it is the cause of all suffering. It was the eating of the fruit that said to man and women, you are now separate. You are separate from the rest of the living beings. You are separate from God, and you are separate from each other. And God says, and this is, we'll read this symbolically. Of course, it's written, here's the explanation. Because you became aware of sin, really is what it's talking about here, because you became aware of error and because you began to participate in error, then you will have suffering. And the suffering amounts to, first of all, women, you're going to bear your children in pain. You're going to give your devotion to your husband. And the connotation here is both of them are going to break your heart. And then to the man, he says, now you got to work for your living. You're not in harmony with the world anymore. You're not in harmony with the animals and with nature. So you're going to have to fight to earn a living. You are going to have to work and toil and struggle, and the ground is going to give you, what it says, thistles and briars. But you're going to get enough plants and such to take care of yourself, right? Because you are not in harmony with things, you are going to struggle. And this is the symbolism that we need to take from this story. This is what, this whole eating of the fruit is what's called original sin. And really, as far as we're concerned in our study, it is the only real sin. And that original sin was coming into an awareness that we are separate from God. And as a result of that awareness, we have been sent out into the world. We actually sent ourselves. God was nice enough to make us little outfits. We went out into the world to struggle. The struggle ends when we return to God. The struggle ends when we return to a consciousness of oneness. The struggle ends when we forgive duality and see that all life, all creation are one, as in the Garden of Eden. All things are one. All things are in harmony, because there can be no disharmony when all are joined in oneness. That's enough.